The Next Shelter Network presents an Appalachian Trail interview series, 2024 edition. This is a platform for hikers to share their hearts, minds, and experiences. These interviews are hosted by yours truly, Trevor Hendry, otherwise known as Bear. Now to the interview. Well, hey man, thank you for talking with me, for taking the time out of your day and your schedule. We are talking with Bird, and correct me if I don't get this right, but you not only are you planning on hiking the AT this year in 2024, but you are a past through hiker, once a through hiker, always a through hiker, PCT 2020 and CDT 2022. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Sweet. We are currently in the month of April, and you're planning on starting soon, right?
Yeah. So it is, I'm heading to Georgia. I'm leaving tomorrow, Saturday, the 30th of March, and then doing kind of like a road trip thing with my girlfriend and staying at Amicalola Falls on April 1st. And then probably going to get on the trail at like 7 a.m. on April 2nd. And then we'll probably do like 15, 16 miles or so first day. And then that's the beginning.
So you said we. Are you starting out with your girlfriend or
No, she's just driving down there with me, and then she'll see me off at the start of the approach trail at the archway.
okay, got you. That's awesome. Glad she'll be
Yeah,
with you up until the beginning there. So where are you coming from right now? Where do you
I
reside?
actually live in downtown Detroit.
Like downtown,
Pretty
like
bad.
Motor City. All right.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Interesting. Okay. How long have you been in Detroit?
Since I got back from the PCT in 2020, so almost 4 years.
Got you. So before we get into any of your hikes or your upcoming hike, let's kind of take it all back to the genesis a little bit. Where are you originally from? Where were you born?
I was born in Detroit.
You're born okay, born in Detroit, still there? Have you
Oh
I'm
yeah.
sure you moved around a bit through your life, or has it mainly just
No,
been
I grew up in a town like 2 miles north, so everybody knows about the movie 8 Mile. Um,
yep.
I grew up 2 miles north of 8 Mile, um, in a small town called Roseville, which I can see Detroit from my backyard. My parents still live in the same house. I grew up on a dead end street, um, but yeah, I've lived here my whole life. The longest time I've spent alone has been on through hikes.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
A lot of people they think of Detroit and they just think of what they hear on television, right? Like it's just this
of course.
large, big slum. But I've been to Detroit. I went to Detroit proper for a little bit. I didn't spend too much time in the downtown area, but I've spent in some time around, right? I visited some friends in Canton, and it's a nice area. It's just like any other place, really. And
Yeah,
and I think unlike most other places in Michigan, man, y'all have got some beautiful country just north of you guys, especially on the
sure
lake.
do.
It's
Oh
did you
yeah.
did you ever meander your way up into any trails or do any
Oh yeah.
naturey things?
I've technically already triple crowned in Michigan. We actually have a triple crown trail system in the upper north part of the lower peninsula. There's three trails. There's the um, Jordan River Valley Trail, the Fife Lake Trail, and the Manistee River Trail. And each of those three trails is about 20 miles or so. And if you hike them in 3 days or less, that's considered the Michigan Triple Crown. As far as I know, it's relatively new, like within the past couple of years. Um, but I did that one last summer, and it only took me like 21 hours to do that. And I think I'm the first person to do that in that time. So I hiked two of the trails in one day, and then the following day I kind of just took my time hiking the last one. But I
Beast.
have also, I mean, as far as other trails, one of the big accomplishments, two of the bigger accomplishments for me were, I hiked Pictured Rocks Lakeshore. I've hiked that 3 times. Which if you've never been there and you're a hiker, go there. It is one of the most breathtaking views in the entire country. I mean, you've seen the Sierras and the PCT, yeah, that's amazing, of course. But as far as like the Midwest, Pictured Rocks is unbeatable. Uh, I also did a 9-day hike on Isle Royal, which is a small island in Lake Superior. Um, and just getting to the island itself is a major undertaking. You either have to take a ferry for like 6 hours, or you can take a seaplane to get there. Um, so yeah, I mean, I've definitely explored a lot of the trails in Michigan, um, and yeah, I've been doing that my whole life basically. And I decided that I got a taste of what through hiking is, and started doing that.
Nice, man. So you heard it here
Hmm.
first, the Michigan Triple Crown.
Yeah.
So as far as you know, right? You said that you've done the fastest known time, the FKT.
As far as I know,
Put it in
there's
there,
a
man. Put it in there because someone else will. You gotta you
yeah.
gotta get
Well,
recognized.
I don't think the people that hike, because it is a very casual trail system. Um, I don't think people hike it to do any kind of FKT. I did
Mhm.
it because I knew that I could.
Yeah.
The trails aren't super difficult, and even if it is, 40 some miles in a day, it's not like you're covering 40 miles on the CDT, where it's gonna really beat you up. Um, it is funny though, when I did that, uh, those 3 trails, uh, I lost 2 of my toenails on that one, but didn't lose any on the PCT or the CDT. But on a Michigan trail, somehow that happened.
You know, it's interesting. They always say it's like some kind of rite of passage to lose a toenail on a through hike, and I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those sayings, like pooping your pants and stuff. I've never
Never
experienced that,
happened.
but yeah,
Never happened.
don't apply to us.
Yeah.
So you're setting the stage, right? All this happened prior to your PCT through hike. You know, a lot of people they think of those who are starting their first through hike. They watch what was it? The Cheryl Strayed movie Wild, and she's got the pack
Yep.
the size of a large human on her back, or they watch Bill
Hmm.
Bryson's read Bill Bryson's book and watch the movie, and you're like
Yes.
bunch of scrubs starting out on the trail, but you had some tangible experience. Um, you had really, I'm sure
Yeah.
by this time, dialed in kind of your gear and at least your mental expectation of what a trail can be and what it can do to you and your body and your mind. So,
Hmm.
did you feel confident going into that first through hike?
So the first through hike, because it occurred in 2020, I had a start date of May 15th, so that's relatively late for the PCT. But it was later on in the whole like pandemic phase that they were saying, you know what, outdoors is good, go for it. So I packed 2 weeks worth of food, like straight up like 14 days worth of food
That
in my
sucks.
backpack, and just hoped for the best. Because my normal routine for backpacking is, okay, well, I have this much food and I'm gonna probably not get to a town for 2 weeks maybe, so I'm gonna just pack that, not realizing that there's a lot of trail logistics that, like, oh well, Campo's only like a day's walk away from the start, and all these other towns that are within a couple of days of hiking. So when I did the PCT, it was just hike as far as you can for as long as you can and see what happens. And that was the only expectation I had. If I can wake up the next day, throw my pack on and walk, I'll walk the whole day and see where it gets me. And it got me from Mexico to Canada.
So
So
2 weeks of food, for the casual viewer here. When you're through hiking, that's like, I don't know, 3 day resupply in AAT for me is like 10 pounds. It's like
yeah.
serious 10, 15 pounds. 2 weeks, I can't even imagine. You're pushing 20, 30 pounds of food.
Hmm. Yeah, it was stupid. I have one of those hyperlight bags, and the roll top couldn't shut. And on the PCT, I ate one of those dehydrated backpacker pantry meals. I had one of those every night I was on trail. So I
Nice.
had 14 of those packed in my bag. along with all the supplemental breakfast bars and snacks and stuff.
Yeah.
But it was
So
because, I was in a panic. I didn't know how far I could get.
yeah, yeah. It was an interesting year, obviously, and I'm not sure. I got to refresh my memory. I'm not sure how the weather played out for you guys that year, but starting in May, snow isn't as much of a concern going through the Sierras. Is that correct?
Right. And actually, I not only did I have a later start date, but it was a relatively lower snow year. So if you look up Forester Pass, like and watch videos of people climbing over Forester Pass, especially during the PCT hiking season, it is a nightmare. There is so much snow. There's this really narrow little choke point that you have to cross, and if you don't have an ice axe, you might not make it. I stepped on the snow on that trail maybe twice,
Wow.
and Forester Pass, I was walking on rocks. There was almost no snow, and I say that the PCT for me was just 130 days of sunshine. I think I got rained on maybe 3 or 4 times on that whole trail.
Yeah. I had a very similar experience on the East Coast. I mean,
Oh yeah,
weather was miraculous, really. There was enough rain down south to keep water sources going. Same with up north, but by the time we got up there, we didn't have to deal with any of the mud going through Vermont, and yeah, it was glorious. I felt like the trail systems were uh, kind in a sense, not that I would have wanted to be anywhere elsewhere in the world at that time, but they were making it up to us. They treated us
yeah.
well. Now, in terms of fires, I know 2020 was a big fire year, and that's a concern for a lot of people starting on the PCT. Is how are they going to get through in the fire window? Did you have to deal with any big fires or closures?
Um, there were there was a small section somewhere up in Northern California that we had to navigate around. Um, can't remember exactly where it was at, but I do know that at one point, somewhere in Northern Oregon into Washington, we had fires to the east, to the south, and to the west, and they were like getting closer to the trail. So we just had to keep moving. Um, and eventually, we kind of, the fires held off enough, but it was like closing the trail behind us, basically. Um, but it wasn't nearly as bad as I think 2021 was pretty bad for fires. Yeah.
Got you. So we kind of have to go at a little hyper speed here because we're talking about your hike then, and then the next year, then obviously upcoming the AT. You finished the PCT. I don't know how old were you at this time?
I think 36.
So you're 36. So you fall into a boat that I think when most people think of those who are through hiking, it's generally younger folks coming out of college. It's older people that have retired. So you fall into this different camp in life, right? You may be necessarily not finding yourself out there because you've got all this life experience. I'm not calling you old, but you have a certain amount of life experience going into this. How did you feel at the end of it? Not just physically, but how did you process? And I understand you're still probably processing that hike, but finishing that trail, what was that experience like for you? You just finished your first major through hike.
It's really funny. At the beginning of my last hike for the Triple Crown, to think that at the end of my first through hike, I was recorded saying, "I am never doing this again. This is one of the worst things. I'm in so much pain. I'm so exhausted." Um, and I felt that way, like, when my girlfriend and I were driving back to Detroit. I in my head it was that was a once in a lifetime thing, and I will probably never do that again. Um, but processing it, I told myself if I can do this, like if I can do the PCT, I can do anything. That was my mentality. So when I finished, even though I was like, nope, I'm done, I still had that. So that means when I go home, I can do whatever I want. I can do anything. I just have to endure it. And I think that's kind of been the spirit of my hiking, and I also do long distance running as well. Um, and it's always been with the spirit of endurance and understanding what that means to me and uh, how I experience it, and what does it mean to endure a physical sport and go the distance, you know?
So when we talk about endurance, it's not only the component of how far are we going, it's also making it to the end because you can go far and not make it to the end. Would you say that finishing, well, something that you start, is that equally as important as just enduring
Yes.
something long?
Um, uh, for me, if there is a finish line, uh, above all else, I remember when I started the CDT, I had set specific goals for myself, and the number one goal was get to Canada. Above all else, finish the hike and get to Canada. Um, I think that for me, it may be different for others. You know how it's that saying of, it's not the destination, it's the journey to get there. And for me, it's like that. But um, if there is a finish line, then it's important for me to get to it. No matter how long it takes, as long as I can get there. And I think crossing that finish line is just as important as the journey for me.
Yeah. And I respect that. And in, yeah, there's a million different ways you can hike a hike. I don't think there's necessarily a million different ways that you can finish a hike. And granted, we'll all hike our own hikes, right? And we do it differently. But at the end of the day, you have to have the mindset to get there. And
Hmm.
so I think this is a good example, right, of the kind of mentality that it takes to finish a trail. This is coming from somebody who has done multiple through hikes on different trails. So let's talk about that a little bit. I'm sure there's always, like for me with the AT, I ultimately fell back on doing the AT again because, well, at the time I wanted to hike with with my girlfriend, but also it was something that I knew, is something I was comfortable with. I knew mentally what to expect. You finish the PCT, and how do you come to a place where you say to yourself, you know what? Not only do I want to do another through hike, I want to do a different hike. How do you go from a place of saying, all right, I can do anything I put my mind to, and you did, to saying, all right, I'm going to take my life in this direction. And I'm sure at that time you're probably already contemplating triple crowning. Am I right in assuming that?
Um, I think when I felt the call to do another through hike, specifically the CDT, um, I knew that if I was going to hike that the AT was going to be on my radar. Um, and it's weird, the thought to hike the CDT in my head, it always been that the CDT was like kind of like this ominous, intimidating trail system, because it really is a trail of extremes. And when I heard the voice in my head start saying like, you should do another long trail, and it should be the CDT. Like, it started getting louder and louder in my head, and then I had mentioned it to my girlfriend like, hey, I'm thinking about doing the CDT. What do you think? And she was like, you have to go for it. And when you have that kind of immediate support um, from your partner, it can go a long way. Uh, I mean, I ended up finishing the CDT, and that was with the mentality of never wanting to do a through hike after the PCT. But it's something like, if you know what trail life is like, you know how much you can miss it. And when you tell yourself there's a possibility that you can go back to it again, you'll start finding ways to make that happen. You'll start, putting some plans together or checking your gear out, see if it can go through it again. And then before you know it, you've saved up and you're at the next terminus for your next through hike.
It's like a seed, man. Once that seed gets planted, you
Yeah.
can you can put it to the back of your brain for a little bit, but it keeps growing. And yeah, it's something you miss, and it's literally inside of your DNA. I
Yeah.
think it's probably I don't, I know some people do it, right? They're able to through hike a trail and then just go back to their life as usual, or they didn't have to necessarily be mundane, but they just go back to life they were living before with no major changes. And yeah, it's hard to imagine that.
Yeah.
But
Well, people said like, what are you gonna do um when you go back to normal life? And I said, well, there is no going back to normal life. Everything's different now. I've just lived this incredible experience, and it's like, normal life for me is it doesn't exist anymore. I have this different perspective of the way I want to move through life. And um in Bill Bryson's book, when he says, he can look on the horizon with eyes of chipped granite, um I think that resonates with me a lot. I feel like when I look off into the horizon, it's there's this duality of I've seen what's beyond it, but also of curiosity of what is beyond that horizon, you know?
yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think you hit the nail on the head, man. Like we're different. So naturally, if we're different, we step into even the same atmosphere, the same environment we came from. It's still different, regardless, right? Even if that is the exterior things are completely the same, we are different. And
Yeah.
that can literally change everything around us too. Not just happening, not just what's happening with us from within. So I know you've mentioned your girlfriend multiple times. It's from what it sounds like, she's been a very big part of this journey for you. She's been a big support system. Would that be a good way of saying it?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's kind of hard to put into words, I guess, but when I went to present her the idea of hiking the CDT, I was sort of hesitant to do it, and I'm not really sure why. I guess maybe I was afraid that she'd be like, no, you already did one, you don't need to do it again. But I knew that I wouldn't know unless I talked to her about it, and that's kind of the relationship we have. We communicate, and when she immediately said like, go for it, uh, that to me says a lot about how much she supports what I'm doing with all this hiking. Um, and I mean, it's a huge sacrifice for her too. Um, she back at home having to do all the day to day stuff, and kind of maintaining the house. Uh, and that's a huge sacrifice for her, and it's not lost on me that there's there's so much that she's willing to do so that I can go and walk for 5 months.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I'm sure it takes a lot of trust. You mentioned communication. Um, and for some couples, even if they had two of those things, it just wouldn't work. But for others, it does. That's just the
Mhm.
dynamic. And I'm sure that she's found that you're a happier person in general when you through hike, especially because that's now part of your makeup.
Yeah.
You mentioned house. Do you have a permanent residence in Detroit? Are you permanently there, or is it kind of a temporary
Yeah, we
setup?
have uh we have a condo in Detroit.
Got
So
you.
I mean, yeah, we're like downtown in a nice little condo. We got a park in our backyard. It's nice. Good area.
Cool. So, in light of everything we've just talked about, now we're looking towards the Appalachian Trail. And out of all the big three, it's the most talked about. It's the most widely recognized, um, and there's a crap ton of information on it. I mean,
Too
so
much
uh,
information.
there really is. It's just talking with my wife today, and I was researching something. This whole side tangent, but you go online and there's just so much information. It's a cluster, and sometimes it can confuse you. And I, I think that's what happens when people are researching the AT is they get all these different opinions, and it's just
Yeah,
better to go out there and do the damn thing yourself. Anyways, um,
100%. Yeah.
so what's kind of been your mental approach to getting ready for the Appalachian Trail?
Uh, well, I maintained a pretty good running regiment. Um, when I got off the CDT, I kind of immediately transitioned back into long distance running. I stopped about a month ago, work had picked up and it was getting pretty tough, so I kind of tapered off my workouts just so I wasn't burnt out at the beginning. Um, I I did realize that um, talking about all this information that gets shared about the AT, if you compare the Facebook groups, I think you can sort of get an idea. I mean, and this isn't saying too much because it's Facebook hikers, but
Yeah.
the AT Facebook groups never stop talking, right? And they're constantly sharing information. And then you go to the PCT groups. These are people that are actively trying to get onto this trail. They're sharing specific information about areas on the trail that you may try to avoid, or if there's somebody lost something on the trail, it's like very specific information that's extraordinarily useful. But on the CDT Facebook groups, nothing. There's almost no conversation on there, and maybe it's because not that many people hike it. But when people do make posts, um, there it's usually very useful information, but not nearly as much chatter as the other two. And I think that maybe that could be a way of like, you know, there's definitely a different caliber of hiker on each of these three trails, just from what I'm gathering of other people's experiences. And I think that it'll be interesting to really see in person what kind of hikers are on the AT, because there's so many different types. Um, and it's kind of hard to put each one into, to describe each trail, but the AT definitely seems like it's going to have a lot of characters on it, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. The
But as far as
Facebook group.
mentally for the AT, I kind of went off on a tangent there. Mentally, it's just been, uh, you know, keep saving money and double check your gear, because I am using some gear from my previous through hikes. Um, and don't injure yourself. That's pretty much it.
How much of that gear have you been able to maintain, keep, preserve over the course of your hikes?
Actually, that is my hyperlight from the CDT right there. And then
Nice.
also back there, I have my Jolly Gear shirt from the CDT. I have a green Patagonia puffy jacket that lasted me all through the PCT and the CDT, and it'll last me through the AT as well. Um, I have this random gray shirt. It's a Columbia shirt. It's just like a t-shirt that I like to sleep in. That's lasted. It's not worn out or anything. I have a couple of small pieces of equipment that lasted, but those are the big ones.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's. I know you went on a little tangent there. Let me just say, the Facebook groups are the most asinine thing on this earth. 98% of those people, they're either bots that aren't even real, or they're people who don't hike. And
Yeah.
it's amazing to me how people can speak with such authority about something they know absolutely nothing about. It's honestly at this point it's just become comedy. I'm in those groups just to like laugh.
Hmm.
Um, but I think when you're talking about what's the caliber, what's going to be the vibe of the AT hiker in the beginning, it's such a cluster, it's such a mess because again, people hear about it, so they naturally want to test it. They want to go out there. Some people on a whim, some people plan for it, but they don't have any idea. So you're going to get all these people in the beginning. And I think as it thins out, that's really once you're, I think once people who start in the beginning thin out after a while, that's when you really start to, I think, find the common ground and that hiking spirit that can be found on the CDT, on the PCT, and really find some. I'm sure you'll find camaraderie with people in the beginning, but to really understand the pulse of the trail and its people, you'll just have to uh, keep walking north. You'll
Yes.
find it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, I
do you?
hear that it's about 500 miles or so on the trail. That's when the people that are truly committed to finishing have stayed on the trail, somewhere around the 500-mile mark. That's from what I've read in my research.
Yeah, yeah, and even I would say even a couple of weeks into one's journey, if again, so many people who are starting the Appalachian Trail are coming from a baseline of 0. So
Yeah.
once they develop the routine and they're out there for a week or 2 at a time, that's really the ultimate test, right? It's not the first resupply, it's the repetition and finding yourself in the routine. And
Yeah.
once I think people are able to do that, then you just have to make a decision. Do I want to keep doing this or do I not want to do it? And I usually find at that point in the trail, at least in what I've seen, is normally around hot springs. Because by that time you've been out there 2 or 3 weeks, and that's long enough, out there that's like
Mhm.
feels like forever. But
Yeah.
it's not too far in where people can feel like I've done enough, I want to jump off. So it's interesting. Um, do you see the Appalachian Mountain Range as I don't know, have you ever hiked any of the mountains out east before?
Oh yeah. I've got a story.
Oh, let's
Um,
hear.
so a few years back, this was, probably my second or third real backcountry trip. A friend of mine had reached out and said, "Hey, I'm planning this trip to go hike the Presidential Range." And I was like, "Well, that sounds cool. Let's go, man." And I got a couple of my friends that I'd hiked with before, and next thing we know, we're hiking up this thing. I don't know if you're familiar, but it was called King Ravine.
Yep.
It's in Rudolph, New Hampshire, and it's the route that gets you up into the Presidential Range. So this was at the end of May some years ago, and we
Ooh,
knew how the
wow.
weather could turn, but we all thought like it's the end of May, we'll be all right. No, we get up into the mountains and we are super low on water. We can see Mount Washington, and we know there's an observatory up there. This was also before Far Out. We had maps. That's it. That's all we had, like physical maps. And it definitely was a rookie mistake. Um, but we ended up having to set camp above the tree line about 3 miles south of Mount Washington because we didn't have the energy to make the climb up. So we set up this really janky camp, like on a slant, and the wind is just destroying our tents. And a blizzard blows through. We all have
Oh,
three season gear. There was tons of snow. It was whiteout conditions. The only way we got to the summit of Mount Washington is because of the cairns that were stacked along the trail. So whenever people like talk about stacking rocks, you know, as like art, like be very conscious of where you do that because if someone had decided to make art on that specific trail, it could have led us to our death. We had 70-mile-per-hour winds with a negative 17-degree wind chill. And when we got to the top of Mount Washington, two of my friends had frostbite, and one of my buddies had hypothermia. So I was over prepared. I actually had a down jacket with me, but it was still this shock of like what we just went through. And uh, it was nuts. We talked to the rangers. We explained to them where we camped, and they said that if we had tried to summit, we would have been in more life threatening conditions than we already were in. So uh, being able to go back to the presidential range and see Mount Washington with thousands of miles of hiking under my feet, it's kind of a full circle for that area. Um, to kind of like push back Mother Nature, and I don't know. It's gonna be very cathartic, I think, for me because most people would be like, I'm never going back. That was crazy. I almost died up there. But for me, it was like, I'm gonna go. I don't know when, but I'm going back.
yeah. Well, I think that's the perfect place for you to have been, right? Because I think a lot of people they hike on the West Coast, right? And this is somebody who's very ignorant. I've never hiked on the West Coast. I just hear things, right? I hear that the trails, check me out, they have switchbacks. And I hear and I hear
Me
that you
too.
could actually switch back up a way up a mountain. And I think the tendency for people who do a lot of hiking out west is when they think of the Appalachian Mountain Range, there's no 14,000-foot mountains here,
Right.
right? The highest we get is 6,000 feet. So naturally, one would think, all right, well, it can't be that hard. But they don't take into account the trail conditions, how the trails are maintained, the slope, and I think a lot of a lot of people get their butts kicked when they come over here from out west. I think it's a good thing, right? That you got the worst of it, right? Like I can't think of a worse place. Not a worse place, but a more difficult place to hike on the East Coast than
Yeah,
than the presidentials or Southern Maine or New Hampshire.
yeah. It was um it was definitely a good experience for backpacking because it definitely gave me more of um a drive to want to experience that again. To come so face to face with a force like that from nature, um, there was something really pure in that, you know. And it's a little difficult to explain, but when I think back to that story, and I think about going up that mountain and like screaming at my friends, like, "No, guys, we've got to keep moving. We can't stay here. This is bad." Like it's primal, it's pure, it's natural, it's raw, it's all these things. Um, so being able to experience that was a highlight for sure in all the hiking that I've done. Just a lot of rookie mistakes, but a lot of mistakes that I was able to learn from in order to have two successful through hikes, you know? And I hope to carry all that over and maybe share some of that knowledge somewhere along the AT.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I think it's easy for us to become disassociated or kind of depersonalized from everyday life because when we're doing things on a day-to-day basis, we're not in any real danger, right? We're insulated inside this tiny bubble. But when you put us against the elements of nature, I mean, it like you said, it's primal. That that
Hmm.
that that instinctual fear. I mean, bone chilling. I mean, fear that the elements can put you in, and yeah, I can see how that would not only be something that might deter somebody, but also something that attracts one to seek again. I mean, I've spent
Yeah.
when I was younger a lot of time on the ocean. And I remember being young and often afraid, right? I would go out on a boat. We'd go out in the Atlantic side past the point where you can even see land. And I remember being young and just scared. But I look back on that as an adult now and I say, wow, like that was a really cool experience. Not many people get to experience that primal instinct.
Hmm. There's I had mentioned that I visited Isle Royal, and there was a seminar on the island about the wolf and moose population, right? And you know, long story short, the presenter said that the wolf and moose population was at a crossroads, and there was a decision that the parks had to make. Do they introduce more wolves onto the island and help control the moose population, or do they take no action, or do they hunt the moose and control the numbers? Um, Essentially, they decided to introduce more wolves, but their reasoning to make a decision to do something rather than no action and let the island be decimated by um, the moose population, their reasoning was that uh, people would criticize and say, well, why are humans manipulating nature? You know, why would we have any say in it? And the researchers came back and said, when did we stop being a part of nature? And when you really think about that question, sure, there's a lot of man-made things here. Like I'm in a house, I have TVs and computers and stuff, but we all come from nature, you know? And when I hike, I try to have that perspective in mind as well. And I think that kind of helps remind me that, even though I am afraid, if there's like this crazy mountain climb or if there's some stir in the night and I'm in my tent by myself, um, I come from that place a long time ago, but I come from nature and I'm okay in nature because I am a part of it, you know? That kind of perspective in those situations, I think, uh, is important to have that we are somewhat removed from it, but in a way, we are still 100% part of it.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Well said. So when we're thinking about the AT, it's the final leg of the Triple Crown. You were in different places in life, I'm sure, over the past 4 years. A lot can happen in 4 years, especially when you do multiple trails. What are you What are you trying to get from this experience in particular on the AT in the year 2024 in this stage of your life?
Hmm. Nobody has asked that question. Um, Specifically from the AT, um, I think I need to see Mount Washington again. That's a pretty important thing for me. Um, and achieving the Triple Crown uh, on the AT specifically, um, man, I don't know. That's a really good question. I think my number one goal for this one is I hope that I can share some of my knowledge um, from hiking, not just the physical aspects about equipment and trails, but I guess the spiritual aspect of it and the connections that I've made in that realm, and be able to share that with people on the AT, even if it means just if there's one person that I end up hiking with and they're like, I'm going to quit. Um, if I can somehow motivate that one person to stay on the trail and see it through to the end, then I think I will have accomplished my goal on the AT. Being able to share that knowledge or motivate somebody to keep going, because that's what I think is important on through hikes. That spirit to get up in the morning and keep going and endure it. Um, yeah, I think that's what I would be looking for on the AT, just to share knowledge about the physical aspect and the spiritual and the mental aspect of it all.
So
Good
it seems
question,
like
man.
it seems like we're kind of transitioning in this journey, right? That you've been on. Whereas I feel like maybe the first couple hikes were mostly or mainly for yourself. And obviously, the whole time you're considering, you're thinking, and you still love your girlfriend, your family, and whatnot. But now, right, you know, I'm not saying that the AT can't give you something, and obviously will to contribute a lot to your life, but you're probably feeling a sense of purpose, right? To kind of give back to to a community of people who you were in their shoes at one point, right? You were first starting your hiking journey, and so now you want to kind of give back to that. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. That's I think that question specifically, I'm gonna be thinking about that a lot while I'm out there. Because nobody has asked that. Like, what is it I'm looking for on that trail? Like, oh, that's wild, man. That's a good question. I'm gonna be wondering about that. Check up
Well,
on
we'll
me in like 2 months. I might have a different answer.
Yeah, no, actually, that'll be the perfect time because, like I mentioned in the beginning, when I first reached out to you, or I don't remember if you reached out to me or not, but I'd like to meet up with you again towards the halfway point on the trail. And so I'm doing this. We can discuss this. I can pull this clip back up, but I'm doing this experiment
Hmm.
with the people that I interview. I want you in where you are right now. I want you to when thinking of your future self at the halfway point, if there's anything you'd like to say to your future self in that moment, what would you say?
Hmm.
And when we're there, I can bring this clip back up and I'll show it to you. So in essence, you're talking to your future self, and you can take a little bit to think about it because I can edit all this
Yeah,
out.
that's a lot. I don't know, man, because that's the deep stuff, you know? Huh.
If it wasn't philosophical, if it wasn't anything spiritual, maybe it was something practical even. What would you say to yourself? You're in Harper's Ferry, you're Pine Grove, 1,000 miles into your AT hike.
Man. Um, it's weird because I don't think that far ahead. I'd like to try to ask myself a question like that, and or like even talk to my future self. Um, yeah, this is going to be a good experiment, man. I dig this for sure. But oh man, what am I going to say? I think if I had to like pick a point in time, it would be at Mount Washington, and you know whatever that looks like. I know I can summit it, but I would say like, you pushed back. Yeah, I think something like that. I don't know. Because I have this very long story about Mother Nature and pushing me down, and it's a whole thing. But um, I think I would just say you pushed back. Maybe even at the end. Uh, I don't know, man. There's a lot.
Yeah,
It's a deep thing. It's not that I have nothing. It's
yeah,
just at those points later on, I know that there's so much that goes into the spirit uh inside that keeps you
yeah,
going.
yeah.
And I don't know if there's anything that I could say that I could think to say to the person that's,
I
that
tell
I'm
you
going
what
to
we'll
be.
do. I tell you what we'll do. Instead of that, we'll just revisit the initial question, the first question, right?
There you
That
go.
that you
Yeah.
wanted to kind of saunter and ponder on the trail. So we'll revisit that, and yeah, I'm sure it'll be interesting. And I'm looking forward to linking up with you in person around that time. I'm sure it won't be too long before then. And yeah, man, I'm thankful for your time. This has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this
And
has been fun.
yeah, so thank you for your time talking with me. And I'm happy you're going to be out there on the trail, kind of giving back to the community a little bit. And I'm excited to follow along, and we'll catch up soon. So appreciate you.
All right, man. Sounds good. I'll talk to
All
you in a
right,
while.
talk then.